very warm hello to each of you tuning in. I'm back after a 3 month break that was completely unplanned. As you all know, I was caregiving my mother in law, who actually has been one of my biggest cheerleaders, and she's feeling much better now. And I'm recharged to bring back my next set of amazing stories. My guest today is Dr. Barbara Wallace, Professor Emerita at Teachers College, Columbia University. Dr. Wallace was founding director of the research group on disparities in health at Teachers College and made history by establishing the college record for sponsoring the largest number and most diverse doctoral graduates from around the world. It's 168 across 33 years. Dr. Wallace has authored 9 acclaimed academic books. She currently spends her time engaging in service as a clinical psychologist with a small Zoom practice, working as a founding director of Centering Light Services, as well as a doctoral dissertation consultant and professional editor. This year, 2025, marks her 25th anniversary as a Queen Mother who has engaged in philanthropy and fundraising to support the education of students in Ghana, Africa, as well as health projects. This to me is so fascinating. So let's just jump into the conversation. Dr. Wallace, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for doing this conversation and love to begin right here. Love for you to tell us what does this mean to be a queen mother and how did this journey begin?
Well, what it means is service. It means service in Ghana as well as service here in the United States. It provides an opportunity for me to connect spiritually with my ancestors in Ghana as an African American woman. And it came about because I went to a conference, and I want everyone to know that conferences can be some of the most magical experiences one can have. So I actually went to a conference of the International Black Women's Congress.
Mhm.
And at lunchtime, they were giving out their highest award that they called the Omni Award, which acknowledged unwavering commitment to uplifting the lives of people of African ancestry. And it was given to someone who I had never seen anyone so happy to receive an award. So, of course, I'm like, okay, after lunch, I'm going to go to her workshop. So I went to her workshop, and it turned out that I ended up being invited to go with her to Africa. And I went in August of 99 and I met the elder of her family, a family considered to be like the landlord, some of the original indigenous people of this particular ancient
Mhm.
mountainous town. And then I pledged to come back to assist her with performing certain rites that January. I was so grateful for all of the opportunities that were being afforded to me that I really wanted to assist this particular woman who was an African shaman with one of her two organizations. So I prayed for 3 days. And what I heard was Queen Mother. And then she, as an African shaman, typically did a New Year's Eve reading to see what was coming for the year. And as a result, one of the things she told me in the morning was that she was told by the oracle that I should be Queen Mother. So we go to greet the elder of the family that morning, which was typical while we were there. And she was about to share this information. And the elder said, stop, held up her hand and said, stop. And then she declared that I should be made Queen Mother. So for me, it was like three independent confirmations that this somehow was my spiritual destiny. So by January 6th, there was an installment of me as Queen Mother, actually called the Asuna Abradehima. And I was given the name of the former Queen Mother who held that particular position, which was Nana Ohima Ajiriwa the first. And so I became Nana Ohima Ajiriwa the second. And as such, I immediately became mother to like 7,000 children. I mean, this kept unfolding in terms of what it meant, but it ended up meaning philanthropy, it ended up meaning service. I ended up being invited to conduct a needs assessment of the schools in this particular town called Latte. And then I also formed a task force and allowed the teachers and headmasters prioritize the needs of the students. And so they identify which schools had the most urgent needs. And then I returned to the United States and began fundraising, which really continued for the next 20 years up until the pandemic when things kind of stalled, I should say. But it's been a wonderful experience to support the education of approximately 350 students. We built a kindergarten. We bought electricity to several schools. We bought windows and screens to many schools. And it's just been a very rewarding experience to also do things like build a building, which became an HIV/AIDS prevention center. So it's been a great experience altogether.
Wow, this is so fascinating, Dr. Wallace, and thank you for sharing this. It's a huge learning. Like, these are not things which I was familiar with at all. So, when growing up, were you familiar with these terms or were you familiar with the idea of the Queen Mother?
No, it was not. No, I had absolutely no knowledge of any of that, which is perhaps unfortunate because there have been queen mothers as well as chiefs who have traveled to Ghana and have been installed in positions. And they've engaged in similar kind of philanthropy work in the communities or in association with the towns where they were installed. So it's kind of embarrassing in a way that I didn't know. But since then, I've met many queen mothers as well as chiefs or kings who've been installed in positions in Ghana.
So, what was your first reaction when it was sort of proclaimed that you're going to be the Queen Mother?
Well, it was all an exercise in humility because as a professor, it's the easiest thing in the world to be infected with this condition called arrogance.
Yeah.
So when I first went in August of 99, I think my humility training began insofar as I might sit in a conversation and hear two or three paragraphs, and then the translation is like one sentence. you know so the idea is that the patience that's required, the respect that's required, and the process of gaining greater and greater humility, I think, is exactly what I needed as a classically arrogant professor. And so I kind of just entered into a process which actually my guru would call accepting and allowing. And so that's really what I was doing. I was accepting and I was allowing a process to unfold that clearly was spiritual, that clearly was an honor, and that had implications that I just had to continue to discover, you know, as time went by.
Mhm. So let's go back to times in a sense, Dr. Wallace, and share with us your early years, people or experiences growing up that shaped your worldview or give you a sense of what really matters.
Well, I was the youngest of three children to parents who were public school teachers. So I have memories, for example, of watching my brother and sister go to school and wanting to go to school so very badly. But as opposed to me having the experience of going to school while they were away and everybody was at a school, my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, that I was with my grandmother who was babysitting me. And it was really a very sacred time. I have memories of being on her lap in a rocking chair, taking a nap every day. I remember, once having an accident, where I urinated on myself because I was afraid to go up the steps because I'd actually had fallen down those steps, and just her patience in washing me up and her understanding and her empathy and compassion. Um, but I think our best times were when we went for a walk to the playground, which was called the Tot Lot in the neighborhood. And there was a red jungle gym, and I would climb to the very top and perch myself there. And I later overheard a conversation where my grandmother said, I always knew she was going to be a great woman because she would climb to the top of the playground jungle gym.
Um,
So I think that that was an experience of someone seeing my highest potential and therefore help to nurture it. And I think I also learned the ability from her to see other people's highest potential and to nurture them and to really see them, their potential to climb to the top of the playground jungle gym, so to speak. And then I also have memories of going to church with my grandmother. Her father had actually helped to build in Philadelphia Episcopalian church. And also in that church, I would sit next to my grandmother in her, pew, and I would sing at the top of my lungs, Onward Christian Soldiers. And the little boys behind me would laugh and giggle because it was embarrassing to the extent that I was probably singing at the top of my lungs and maybe not in perfect tune. But I really had this passion that I think was connected with the idea of being a soldier, you know? And my father was a soldier. Both of my parents actually met in the army. They were sergeants in the army,
Wow.
and that's how they met.
Mm.
And my father had a lot of soldier energy because he'd been a soldier in many past lives. He actually had a memory where he was in Napoleon's army and died in the mud for Napoleon. Okay. And so my father really embodied the energy of you are a soldier and you hold your post and that you're loyal. You never abandon your post. And so I think that gave me the concept of being a warrior or a soldier. Even before I had gone to Ghana, I had met someone in California who said that my spirit was that of a queen warrior. So, this whole theme of being really prepared in my life to battle, to persevere, because of this archetypal warrior or soldier kind of energy and consciousness that I had with me.
Mm.
And my mother was also a very fierce and courageous woman who battled racism in the segregated South. As a matter of fact, she had to escape some of that racism because she had applied to a graduate school. And the policy back then was that you would apply to an all white graduate school for your master's degree. You would get rejected because of segregation, but they would pay for you to go to a school up north. And so when it came out, there were so many jealous other blacks and also angry whites. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, had to come to town to kind of quell anxieties. But things were so hot, she could not get a job in South Carolina, so she joined the army. And so she always had that kind of really courageous warrior spirit herself. So that's where I got a lot of my own courage and my own sense of perseverance and determination in life.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Wallace. When I was doing this immense research for this conversation, I was wondering, like, where is this courage coming from? And these few stories have really helped me understand. The other thing which I really took away from your conversation is the importance of just quiet role modeling. You've spent your life working across psychology, education, public health, and social justice. So, was there like a turning point or a moment when you realized this was your path, like this was your North Star?
Well, as I said, my parents were both public school teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And just about all of my aunts and uncles were also public school teachers. So, as early as age 18, I was teaching my first course, training lifeguard. So, it almost seemed to be my destiny to teach. So, I ended up having the opportunity to teach at a teacher's college within Columbia University and to train health educators and public health professionals. The second element was not only was I destined to be a teacher, but I discovered as early as high school that I seemed to have a gift when it came to talking to my peers, that I was very good at counseling them. So whether they were depressed or sad or disappointed, I seemed to have that skill. And then I also majored in psychology at Princeton University, and they had a peer counselor training program. So I did that peer counselor training. And once I discovered there was such a thing as clinical psychology, I was like, that's the profession for me. And it turns out that clinical psychology is one of the most flexible degrees that you can receive that really prepares you to do so many things.
Mm.
So it allowed me to also enter into a department of health and behavior studies, to become a health education professional, and to also create a peer education training program, in this case, for those who would work with those who were at risk for HIV/AIDS. So it all kind of flowed naturally and ended up creating a very nice progression, I think.
At a time when academia was not always welcoming to women of color, you've clearly made a mark for yourself. You also became the first African American woman to move through the ranks and gain tenure at Teachers College.
Mhm.
So, share with us what was that journey like and what kept you going in, I'm sure, moments that must have been quite tough.
Yes. As the quote unquote only one, the only woman or the only Black woman in many different situations, I learned that when one is perched or seeking to climb to the top of the playground jungle gym, that there's really only room for one up there, frankly.
So
So you kind of get conditioned to accept being alone and to do it not with the sense of loneliness or longing, but with a sense of responsibility. You know, that perhaps you have been chosen for this particular mission. Perhaps you are the one who, in fact, volunteered for this mission. I actually think of a passage from the Bible, and I have not read the entire Bible. My spirituality is very much an integration of many Eastern and Western elements. But there's a passage where Isaiah, the Lord says, who shall we send? Who will go? And the response is, here am I, you know, send me. Okay. So when it came to meeting the needs for justice or seeking justice or remedying the situation of the oppressed, then I was always willing to be the first one to raise my hand and said, here am I, send me. And so that meant that an institution that at that point did not have a record of being particularly welcoming to those individuals who were African American or diverse or valuing them by promoting them and retaining them, that it was in many respects an ideal kind of life path that I think I was prepared for. That I went to Princeton University, where in many situations I was the only African American, the only African American female. So I think that I was really prepared. I might have lamented, oh, I'm in this situation again, or I'm not feeling comfortable in my undergraduate years. But it turned out that it was really preparation. If the door is open and there's a seat available, then I'm going to sit there with grace and dignity and to represent the legacy of my parents, who were courageous warriors and fighters. And I'm going to do my very best to reach the top in this particular setting. I like to also describe kind of like a metaphor, which is that as I was going up for tenure and promotion, I had this image of climbing up a mountain, and it's a path. It's the rough side of the mountain, and it's a path that no one has walked before. And as I'm getting near the top, and it's the most steep and the most difficult, it's as though I was just carried to the top. And when my department chair came out of my tenure promotion hearing, he said, it's like it was on autopilot. And so for me, that was a kind of confirmation that it was as though there were these spiritual forces, to the extent that there was a spiritual force that said, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And I said, here I am, send me. That I was never abandoned and I was never alone. So even though it might have been lonely, or some might perceive it as lonely, I was never alone. And so that's what really gives me this very deep sense of gratitude for a spiritual connection and for spiritual assistance.
beautiful. All through the conversation, your biggest guiding force or guiding light is spirituality, right? So help me understand your spiritual journey. When did it begin? And you also said, it's a mix of Western and Eastern learning. So do share with us a little bit, because I think in today's time and age, with kind of challenges we're all going through, probably that's one of the things one can lean into.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because it's a part of myself that when I was in academia, I never shared. And when I'm working with clients as a clinical psychologist, it was a part of me that I never shared. But if you were to have asked me, or tapped me on the shoulder and said, I have a question to ask you, share a secret. What is the most important thing to you? Would have said my spiritual development. That's the most important thing to me. And I think it began really sitting in that pew next to my grandmother
Mhm.
and enjoying her love, her energy, but also this notion of being this Christian soldier. Okay. I ended up growing up in a Jewish neighborhood in Philadelphia. We were the second Black family to move into a neighborhood that had previously been completely Jewish. And then I went to a high school. My best friend was half Jewish and half Italian. And so we just had all this diversity. So I felt this kind of alliance with those who were of different spiritual or religious backgrounds. And then I went to Princeton. As the physical education requirement, I took Kundalini yoga.
Mhm.
And I think it was the absolute best feeling in the world to be in this tower with the Kundalini instructor. And at the end of class, I would be lying there in this tower and I would be coming back from God knows where, but it was the most profound peace I'd ever experienced. So doing pranayama, breathing, just became very important to me. I already had a habit of just walking into bookstores and whatever book I was drawn to. And so typically they were about personal development or they might be about spirituality. And it's not really about finding a guru, it's about finding the guru inside of yourself. And even when I went to Africa and worked with the African shaman, and they have a spiritual ceremony called the Akom, which is dancing, singing, drumming. And I learned that it's the raising of the Kundalini energy in a group setting. And maybe just to give you an example, the African shaman also went to one of Saima's gatherings. And of course, the Indian figurines, the goddesses. And so the shaman goes to take a closer look at the figurines, and she overhears one figurine say to the other figurine, that is the child of a high priestess. In other words, they all knew each other. In other words, the high priestess from Ghana, Africa, whose name was Nana Paribia, here these two Indian figurines are saying that's a Paribia's child because she had trained with Nana Paribia in Ghana. So to me, that was a profound awakening that there's really just one spiritual pantheon.
Wow.
Okay.
Mm.
And they all know each other and that they're all connected. And so, although we're down here dealing with our petty differences, that on a spiritual level,
It's all the
when
same.
when it's said that we are all one,
Yeah.
boy, I don't think we have nearly any comprehension of just how true that is, of this concept of oneness.
Mm.
So that's kind of been my spiritual journey, which is continuing.
Dr. Wallace, you served as the main doctoral dissertation sponsor for 145 students, right? What did it take to build that kind of a pipeline for these diverse scholars?
So I joined Teachers College in Columbia University in 1990, and it was by 93 that I actually sponsored my own doctoral students. And from 1993 to 2023, I had 23 doctoral students who graduated, and they were all very diverse. But it was in 1999 and 2000, then again in 2001 and 2002 that I was now going to Ghana, Africa.
Mm.
And this African shaman said to me one day, in hearing me talk about Teachers College Columbia University, she said, "You don't have any community there." It was like incomprehensible to her. And in terms of Africa, which is a very communal society, as are others, how can you even function without community? So I began to think, well, that's a very good point. So that's why in 2023, I launched the research group on disparities in health with the purpose of creating my own community. Whereas some of my colleagues had great success in getting grants and millions of dollars from the National Institutes of Health, and I had also undergone even special population training to get grants from particularly the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And after 5 applications, none of which were successful, I'm like, this is a waste of time. And as it turns out, articles have since come out that talked about the very low percentage of African Americans and other diverse individuals who get grants, how even grants that had the word community in them or health disparities were like immediately rejected, which of course was a typical concern of many African American scholars. Um, so it became so important for me to figure out how can I do quality research, create my own community without millions of dollars in funding. So, in creating my own community and doing research in a collaborative way with my doctoral students, we pioneered online research. We pioneered online protocols. We pioneered things such as prizes that would motivate people to take a survey. We pioneered using social media. And as social media evolved and it became even easier to collect data, doctoral students were able to get 250 subjects in just
Mm.
2 weeks, for example. So we pioneered how to do online focus groups. So it became a really dynamic atmosphere for doing research. A good way to describe it, which is almost like a Black culture motto. It's like making a way where there is no way. And there was a lot of bonding that occurred because in 2003, I wrote perhaps one of my most important published papers that really talked about the importance of a non-hierarchical relationship. And I simplified it. If you can imagine the equation of like A over B, like one half, like a fraction. So A over B symbolizes all of these hierarchical relationships, whether it's master, slave, teacher, student, all of these relationships that are hierarchical, paternalistic, and not necessarily healthy at all, damaging, traumatic. So the whole idea was to move from A over B to A equals B, non-hierarchical. So that was very much a philosophy that all of us shared. And so we worked in this non-hierarchical, egalitarian framework and really produced some really excellent research. And that's when I had 145 doctoral students. That's when I also pioneered this concept of the dissertation boot camp, where we actually would spend 9 days over spring break together in a conference room, working 9 hours or more, sometimes all night, because I began to attract large numbers of students. Because many of the professors, weren't interested. It seemed as though there was a great interest in having students come and take courses and to pay tuition. But when it came for the rigorous work of working with them on a doctoral dissertation, then a lot of the interest faded. And I felt it was really unethical that we had this kind of clogged pipeline of students who just were not going past finishing their coursework. So I became determined to clear that pipeline, to unclog it, but also to create a pipeline so that they would be able to do what I had not had success doing, and that was becoming successful recipients of grants and for them to become, world-class scholars and also just academics, department chairs, professors, and many of them were going to return to places like India, New Delhi, or we're going to return to places like Jamaica or Cameroon or South Africa or Nigeria and become leaders. And so it just became a wonderful way in which we were able to accomplish both research and what was key was really what my grandmother did for me, which was she saw in me my potential to become great by climbing to the top of the little red jungle gym in the park, as opposed to some professors looking at diverse students or students who had an accent who were from different parts of the world in ways that were denigrating. Instead, I saw their highest potential and I wanted to nurture them to reach the top. And to just share a story about that, I'm reminding of one student who talked about how when her grandfather was on his deathbed, she promised him that she would do something great and that she was going to get her doctorate. And through my work with her and my philosophy that we can make miracles happen together, okay, that you can do this, and combining the use of mantras or affirmations and also visualization for manifestation, she achieved her goal. And when it was accomplished, that she shared that story with me, which to me was very, very touching and very powerful. But to think that this one was able to elevate her whole generation of the family economically, and that had repercussions for what her children and what her grandchildren would be able to achieve because of this whole elevation of the family. So that's why I actually had a personal preference for my doctoral students, whereas we had many master students, and I trained many of them. Those 23 students I mentored before the research group and the 145 with whom we had a special community during the era of the research group, that we really did wonderful work in just elevating entire families. Because the master's degree, oh, it's wonderful, it's nice, but it's the doctorate that could literally transform an entire generation and the trajectory of the family for generations to come.
Beautiful. Dr. Wallace, how did these people find you?
So students are talking after class, and they might be talking about, oh, I'm not so sure how interested this professor is in my topic, or, it seemed to be taking a long time to get to the stage of the proposal. And so by word of mouth, students would just say, go work with Dr. Wallace. As
Mm.
part of my philosophy was that if a woman could have a baby in 9 months, you can do a dissertation in 9 months. You might have to stay up a few nights. You might have to do maybe 10 all-nighters. You might have to sacrifice things like, going jogging and even going to church. But it can be done if you follow this timeline, this formula, and do the visualization and do the mantra and learn how to self-calm. Do the affirmation. In particular, the affirmation was, I am calm, centered, and balanced. And to
Mhm.
visualize the outcome of graduation, you're happy and your family's there. Also key was that I started the annual Health Disparities Conference at Teachers College, Columbia University, and it was a 2-day conference that was just phenomenal. It was really declared like the best, most successful conference at the college. And it would draw graduate students, community members, and we also had simultaneous webinar because as I explained with the research group and not having government funding, we pioneered online research. So I also was a pioneer for online learning at the college. So when the pandemic hit, we were already a program department that had all of these online courses and hybrid courses. And so the conferences were also hybrid. So we could really reach a national audience and in some cases, even a global audience, which from my philosophy, a place where magic could happen, connections could happen, because that has been my experience. That conferences can really be these magical events where you have a temporary community. And we also would have a closing dinner. We would also have a cultural opening with music. We would also have a simultaneous health fair where the hospital was doing breast cancer screening and vision screening and high blood pressure and diabetes screening. So it was really this wonderful, dynamic 2-day community. Um, and a lot of people, by word of mouth, would want to come because my goal was also for my doctoral students to present. So they would also see some of my doctoral
Mhm.
students as featured speakers or on panels, and they would be talking about their research, or they would be talking about our research, the research that I was doing with them, and it became just very exciting. So that really helped to recruit a lot of students who wanted to come to the program to work with me.
So, as we end this conversation, Dr. Wallace, in the last 2 years, over more than 75 Atlantas like yourself, I've come to recognize that there is this unspoken inherited code. And I think that code is quietly shaping roles, expectations, and perceptions, and especially for us women. So, my question to you is, did you feel that code at play in your own journey? And if the answer is yes, then how would you, in a sense, define it based on your experiences?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think that in settings such as academia, there is patriarchy. There is very much a hierarchical structure, and that it is intended to keep you in your place, which is one down. There are those who are one up, whether that's the administration or the president or the trustees, and there are those who are one down or deemed inferior. And so it is very real. So part of what you have to do is draw on your own inner strength. And there are times when it is appropriate to challenge and to speak up. And I must say that I did lead a revolution at Teachers College, Columbia University, and I took risks because I was the only Black woman with tenure, and I felt an obligation to speak up and to challenge. And so, if it's not you, it's to find someone in your community who you trust, who can speak up and can challenge. Because in order for transformation to occur, there has to be that courageous voice, even if it's to ask questions. And the questions are not challenges in the way that a debate or an angry tirade might be, but your questions force people to think and to see the obvious answer that what's happening is not fair, that what's happening does need to change. And so that within itself can also spur transformation. So I would also invite people figure out the good questions to ask that reveal the faults in the system, and to do your very best to also have a daily spiritual practice, to have a community of support so that you can challenge, and also train the next generation in how to do the same thing. That is crucial for the future. So I also would like to express my deepest gratitude to you for this opportunity And I would say that I really want to inspire other women leaders to have courage to persevere and to really change injustice and to create their own communities, just as I did with the research group. And if there's one caution that I think I must give, it's that when you do speak out, you want to make sure that you're the person with tenure or the person with job security, and that you find someone in a community who maybe is not all that vulnerable, because sometimes there's a risk in speaking out and challenging the status quo or challenging patriarchy. And the other part would be that if you're in a situation where people don't want to play with you, then you basically have to create a community and find people who will play with you. Play being a metaphor for work and for collaboration. And most importantly, to pass on what you are doing to others so that your legacy isn't over when you retire, that there are those who are able to replicate what you have accomplished. And so I'm happy to say that many of my doctoral students are doing exactly that.
Thank you very much. This was absolutely beautiful, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you so much. I appreciate what you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do hang on for just one more minute. I have a request for you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Atlanta Diaries on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you follow. Do join us in our mission to empower and inspire by sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It will be great if you can share on the social media platforms you follow, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or any other. Please leave a review or rating on iTunes or Spotify. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Lastly, I wanted to share with you that many of my coaching clients and listeners have created a cheat sheet with their key takeaways from the episodes. I invite you to consider jotting down one or two key takeaways as you navigate your amazing journey. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.